Mali's falling, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. Tuareg rebels launched a surprise offensive in the north of Mali and captured the strategic town of Kidal. And now the entire country could fall into the hands of jihadists. In this video you can see Tuareg rebels from the Azawad Liberation Front at the center of Kidal. Everywhere they went, they pulled down the Malian flag and replaced it with theirs. As a follow-up of their offensive, these rebel forces are seizing many bases just abandoned by the incompetent Malian government troops. Hundreds of Malian soldiers were captured. The entire Russian garrison in Kidal had to surrender their base for safe passage out of the encirclement. In turn, many Russian bases in the region were also evacuated. To be honest, the entire eastern part of Mali is now in the hands of rebels. This is a complete debacle for both the Malian army and the Russian mercenaries. Put simply, Russia's counterinsurgency operation in the Sahel is failing. It is a humiliation. This is another confirmation that they are inefficient and unreliable in the fight against insurgents and jihadists. And this is just the beginning. It's gonna get much worse, as jihadist groups are launching attacks across the entire country.
Cowards! Our men flee the battlefield!
What did I tell you? In the past few years, I've made multiple videos on the situation in Mali. And this was bound to happen. So this video is going to be the most comprehensive overview of what's happening. We'll analyze the real cause of this war, the events that led to the 2026 offensive, and of course, what we can expect next in the Sahel region. As you can see, I just got back from Mexico. I'm a bit more tanned. I was able to travel super light thanks to Extra's Travel Pack Vacuum Kit. You can pack 15 clothing pieces and it compresses the kit by 60% with this air pump. It's designed in the Netherlands and it can fit clothing for an entire week. That means you can travel lightly just with a backpack. It's also perfect if you want to travel with a carry-on only. Extra's Travel Pack Vacuum Kit is rated IPX7 waterproof. And at the same time you save 3 times more packing space. The travel pack is so well made that when you open it, it's odor-proof and your clothes will not be wrinkled. But there's more. Extra has kindly sent me their new collection. Here's the light brown leather wallet. It feels so smooth, and whenever I whip it out, people always ask me where I got it. Usually I keep 6 cards inside for easy access. You just press here and they pop out. And if you're someone that tends to lose your wallet, Extra also offers a GPS tracker that you can connect to your phone. Alternatively, you can also use it to track your luggage at the airport. So whether you want to treat yourself or looking for a unique gift, Extra's new Mother Day sale is live until May 18th with up to 45% off. And if you use my exclusive discount code LEGEND20, you can unlock an extra 20% off at checkout by clicking the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on screen. I've been monitoring the situation in West Africa for years and it's a big mess. Put simply, the latest fighting is not a new phenomenon, but the rebirth of old pre-colonial ethnic conflicts. For example, we're currently witnessing the 5th Tuareg rebellion since the independence of Mali. And here's the thing, Mali loves to blame all its problems on France. Yet it also did everything it can to preserve the country's imperfect colonial borders. These include a multitude of languages and ethnic groups that just don't want to live together. One of them is a group called the Tuaregs. They're ethnic Berbers, and they inhabit this huge desertic landmass spanning over 5 countries. In Mali, they populate the region north of the Niger River, which they called Azawad. But since 1960, every time the Tuaregs demanded some form of autonomy, they were always brutally repressed by the Malian government in Bamako. That's how in 2012, the Tuaregs took up arms once again and rapidly advanced towards the capital, Bamako. It's only the rapid intervention of French forces in January 2013 that saved the Malian government from being overthrown. In 2015, we came really close to a deal with a peace agreement that called for decentralization. But Mali scrapped the entire plan and the war restarted. And then everything changed on the 18th of August 2020, when the Malian military overthrew President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. A couple months later, in May 2021, Colonel Assimi Goïta seized full power from the transitional government. And that's how 1 year later Mali demanded the immediate withdrawal of French forces from the country. And France respected Mali's decision. French forces were replaced by 1,000 Russian mercenaries from the Wagner PMC. For sure, 1,000 lightly armed Russian mercenaries would bring better results than a full-fledged army and would have a better understanding of the complex ethnic situation in West Africa, right? Right?
First time.
The reality is that Russia has been facing a very difficult campaign in the Sahel. It's just not their turf. First of all, the country is absolutely massive. How do you expect 1,000 troops to control and pacify a country the size of Eastern Europe? It's just impossible. And I said this over and over in my previous reports. That's why the primary mission of the Wagner PMC was to concentrate in Bamako to protect the Malian government and secure gold mines. A bit like the Harkonnen in Dune. That's when artisanal gold mines started popping up in the north of the country near the Algerian border. In July 2024, the Wagner PMC dispatched a column of Russian mercenaries supported by Malian forces from their base in Kidal to take over this site. But that's when they got ambushed in the desert by Tuareg rebels near the town of Tinzaouaten. A bit like the Harkonnen in Dune. Long story short, it was a massacre and the entire column was annihilated. As for PMC Wagner, we're talking about a total of about 80 KIA. Local sources claim to have smoked 84 Wagnerians and 47 Malian army soldiers. This marked the end of the 13th detachment of the PMC Wagner. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it. Link will be in the description below. This victory galvanized the Tuaregs, and by November 2024, multiple Tuareg rebel groups merged into the Front de Libération de l'Azawad, or Azawad Liberation Front. The situation for the Malian junta in Bamako was just worsening. It was time for Moscow to send reinforcements and especially new management. On top of the 1,000 Wagnerians commanded by Ruslan Zlobin, in December of the same year, the Russian Ministry of Defense deployed an additional 1,000 mercenaries from the newly created Africa Corps. Hold on a second, what? Instead of a PMC, the Russian Ministry of Defense deployed a state-controlled paramilitary group to Africa that they called, the Africa Corps. This is next-level trolling. Russia fights Ukraine to achieve what they say denazification, but then calls its expeditionary force Africa Corps. What's next? An elite unit called the Northern Guard, or Sivernaya Straza. It was more like a reshuffling, because roughly 70 to 80% of the Africa Corps PMC was made up of former Wagnerians. That means that a force of about 2,000 Russian troops was tasked with securing Mali, a country the size of Eastern Europe. That's when you'll tell me, but they were not alone. What about the Malian army? The Forces Armées Maliennes, or FAMA. African armies, eh? I don't even know where to start. Essentially, despite the support of Russian forces, the Malian government kept losing ground. Actually, same thing for the junta's allies in Burkina Faso and Niger. The nightmare of French imperialists loses another province to jihadists. Yeah, because I told you about the Tuareg rebels, but there are actually multiple insurgent groups operating in the Sahel. There is the Islamic State, but there's also the very powerful JNIM. Although its leader is a Malian Tuareg called Iyad Ag-Ghali, most of its recruits are Fulanis, another cross-border nomadic pastoralist ethnic group that has been beefing with the Bambara majority for 1,000 years. So what we're witnessing is actually an ethnic war disguised as jihad, used as a rallying call. And the jihadists of the JNIM are causing much more damage to the Malian army than the Tuaregs because they have a much larger recruitment pool. For example, here you can see JNIM troops taking over the town of Diapaga in Burkina Faso on the 14th of May 2025. The next day in the north of the country, JNIM stormed an army base and captured a lot of equipment, including 20 PKs and 206 assault rifles. And on the 16th of May, JNIM militants stormed another military base, but this time in Niger. This is how your average JNIM combatants look like, and they always operate the same way. They traded their ancestral horses for motorbikes, which they used to rapidly concentrate on enemy targets, and then equally to quickly disperse into the wilderness. And then they just vanish in the immensity of Mali. A typical unit consists of about 50 motorbikes and 100 combatants. Usually they attack enemy bases in the early morning when the garrison is still asleep. All of a sudden they open fire from all directions using technicals, RPGs, small arms, and machine guns installed on motorbikes. The tactical evolution of these jihadists is that they use more and more drones to coordinate their attacks. On the 29th of May, JNIM launched an attack against the Malian army base in Dura. The Malian government just denied the incident, and then JNIM pulled out all the receipts. The Malian army garrison was completely surprised. Some brave Malian soldiers did man the walls and started firing back, but the majority of the troops just fled. Here we see dozens upon dozens of Malian soldiers just running away.
Cowards! Our men flee the battlefield!
And JNIM even captured this full-on rout with HD footage from a drone. This is typical guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks on exposed enemy outposts. Due to the critical situation, Moscow had to do something. And that's how on the 2nd of June 2025, Russia sent new delivery of military equipment to the Malian army. That's when you'll tell me, but what about the Bayraktar TB2 drones they acquired from Turkey?
Sauf qu'on voit, par exemple, dernièrement, il y a moins de frappes de drones. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a un manque de munitions. Et pourquoi il y a un manque de munitions? Parce que les facteurs ne sont pas payés à temps par Bamako. Donc ça ramène cette histoire de drones à un niveau plutôt commercial qu'à un niveau stratégique.
TIA, this is Africa. Just as Russian military equipment was being delivered, that same day another Malian army base was attacked in Bolkesi.
Un peu plus au centre, une autre attaque, cette fois-ci, dans le camp de Boulikessi. L'armée malienne affirme avoir, là également, déjoué une autre tentative d'attaque de djihadistes contre ce camp, alors que sur le terrain, les témoins affirment que les djihadistes sont plutôt rentrés dans le camp, pris de l'armement, ils ont attaqué les positions de l'armée malienne, causé des dégâts, causé également de nombreuses victimes.
JNIM claimed 100 government soldiers KIA. Once again, a lot of equipment was seized, including 174 AKs. The Malian government denied and said this was only French propaganda. So once again, JNIM released the footage of the attack. In the right corner, we can observe the jihadist motorbikes around the defensive perimeter of the base, followed by the foot soldiers edging closer and closer to the walls.
The walls are destroyed! Into the breach!
Some brave Malian army soldiers desperately tried to regroup for a last stand. That's when they were targeted by bomber drones. Organized resistance had ceased and multiple Malian soldiers were seen running away from the fort. Some managed to escape, but eventually the entire compound was overwhelmed by hundreds of insurgents. And this time 22 Malian soldiers were captured by JNIM. Bamako said it's fake news. JNIM then released footage of 20 government soldiers that they held captive. And this is just 2 weeks of fighting in the Sahel. It's just a glimpse of what's happening. Oh, I hear you're not yet convinced. Let's keep going. On the 4th of June, 23 pro-government militias were KIA between Somabugu and Saura. The next day, JNIM combatants stormed the base in Sirakorola. 24 hours later, it's the army base in Mahu that fell. Once again, a drone recorded the entire battle, and each one of these raids are carefully prepared, because we also have footage of JNIM commanders preparing the battle plan on a mock-up of the base in front of all the troops. If we zoom out, the design of the enemy base is actually very elaborate. 300 fighters are listening to the instructions as detachments are being assigned to specific missions. But look, everything is under control. Look, there's so many incidents like that to list them all would take an hour. So here's a map of all the attacks against Malian government forces between June 2024 and July 2025. The military junta in Mali was clearly losing control, as an increasing number of incidents shifted westwards, right on the periphery of the capital, Bamako. Now, although the majority of the JNIM fighters are ethnic Fulanis, the following footage shows JNIM's efforts to appeal to ethnic groups in the western part of Mali. by translating their talking points in Bambara, Dogon, Senefo, Bobo, and Maninka. And they use jihad and Islam as a rallying tool. Meanwhile, in this other map, you can observe the overall situation in the Sahel. In light brown are the attacks by JNIM, and in green by the Islamic State. If Mali is in trouble, Burkina Faso is getting completely overwhelmed. On the 6th of June, the Wagner PMC announced its official withdrawal from Mali. If Wagner was very secretive, the Africa Corps flexed its muscles by showing off its military might. For example, here we can see 2 of its gunships in action. Usually they intervene right after an insurgent attack against a Malian army position. Helicopters are quickly flown in to inflict as much damage as possible on the attacking force. However, more often than not, by the time they arrive, the jihadists have already scattered. And the problem is that, for example, you have 1 helicopter, but we've seen how a JNIM unit is composed of 50 motorbikes. So what do? They just splinter in all directions into smaller groups. So the damage 1 helicopter can inflict is relatively limited. Here we can see a Chinese-made Norinco VP-11 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle with mine rollers used by the Africa Corps. Yeah, because another threat that they're facing is IDs. Due to the mining industry, there are a lot of explosives available around the country. Bridges are often destroyed, and IDs are a recurrent problem for Russian convoys. As a result, columns often have to drive outside the main axis. Anyway, 1 week after Wagner's departure, a convoy of 30 vehicles from the Africa Corps supported by Malian troops drove out of the town of Anifis in northern Mali. However, on the 13th of June, like a repeat of Tinzaouaten a year earlier, the Russo-Malian column fell into an ambush 40 kilometers before reaching Agerhok in a place called Malian. You know what? This place is not even marked on the map. It's only thanks to this Twitter page called Sharkalite that we could find it. And guess how the ambush started? With multiple Tuareg drone strikes against trucks in the convoy. And this time we even have footage from the ambush, but from the Russian Africa Corps perspective. We see a BTR firing at Tuareg pickup trucks. One of them is burning and the other vehicles quickly scatter. As the drone zooms out, we can see other burning pickup trucks, with FLA insurgents in full retreat. And of course, this is what the Africa Corps published online. So who should we believe? The Tuaregs from the FLA declared that only 10 Russo-Malian vehicles managed to escape. 21 vehicles were destroyed and 15 were captured. They also reported 45 enemy troops KIA, including multiple Russian mercenaries.
Right.
Not only do FLA claims amount to 46 enemy vehicles when the size of the supply convoy was closer to 30, but there's no footage proving any of the FLA's claims. Apparently what actually happened is that the Tuaregs fired from a distance for 2 hours and disengaged once Russian helicopters and drones showed up on the battlefield. Here on the 28th of June, the Russians launched a raid that eliminated an Islamic State leader called Abu Dahda, a Moroccan citizen. The Russians also trained Malian special forces. They even formed Malian drone squadrons. But despite their efforts, insurgents kept gaining more and more ground in the center and northeast of the country. On the 14th of July, the Front de Libération de l'Azawad once again ambushed the Malian army column. And this time the results were undeniable. One month later, on the 15th of August, FLA commanders published a video saying, "We warned the Russians. The theater of operations now exceeds the Malian framework. We are engaged in a direct conflict against Russia and its mercenaries." Next thing you know, you're gonna have Tuaregs fighting in the AFU in Donetsk Oblast. A couple days later, JNIM once again recorded a video from inside the Malian army base, this time near the town of Varabougou. And in early September, the FLA launched drone strikes against the government base in Tessalit. First, because JNIM detachments were now targeting all the oil tankers heading into the capital. The inhabitants of Bamako felt under siege. Second, it became extremely difficult to resupply the garrisons in the northeast of the country. Every passing week, the situation was deteriorating for the Malian security forces. On the 10th of March, an ambush near Nampala caused the death of 10 Malian and Russian troops. This article stated that this attack comes a few days after the execution of 7 people by the Malian army and the Africa Corps in the same area. Meanwhile, in the north, the FLA launched its first shaping operations with a series of very precise drone strikes. On the 24th of October, FPV drones targeted the Bayraktar TB2 drone control center operated by the Malian army. And here are some FPV drone strikes from the 8th of April against the Malian army and the Russian Africa Corps near Kidal. And this leads us directly to the fall of Kidal. On the 25th of April, around 5 a.m., JNIM launched an attack against Kati, 14 kilometers north from Bamako. More importantly, it houses the largest military base in the region. It's also home to important members of the government, such as Malian leader Assimi Goïta. During the attack, JNIM drove a car bomb into the residential sector of the base. As a result, Defense Minister Sadio Camara lost his life, and the Chief of Intelligence Modibo Kone was mortally wounded. Such an operation was only possible with insider information. So you're telling me jihadists drove past multiple checkpoints and went straight for the house of the government leaders? There's something we're not being told. Moments later, entire motorcycle units spread across Kati. The local inhabitants were quite shocked to see the insurgents moving so freely around town. In this clip alone, the JNIM column was composed of 11 technicals and 13 motorbikes. JNIM detachments also approached the Africa Corps base near Bamako, but all their attacks were repulsed. Here you can see Russian troops firing back with RPGs and all the weapons they have available at enemy attackers. Soon enough, the Africa Corps intervened, and multiple of these motorized columns were targeted by drones and were forced to scatter. The Africa Corps declared to have eliminated 1,000 insurgents, but these figures are clearly highly exaggerated. For example, this Orient drone strike barely inflicts damage on the retreating motorbikes. And the attack on Bamako was only a diversion, because it's in the north that the main attack would take place, as Tuaregs of the FLA launched a simultaneous offensive against the stronghold of Kidal, which housed an important Russian military base. The attack started with multiple drone strikes against various armored vehicles. The goal was to pin down the Africa Corps garrison and Malian forces. And it worked. An FLA commander declared that checkpoints at the city's entrance fell within the first hour of fighting. By early afternoon, most of the town had fallen to the Tuareg rebels. In this video, we can observe insurgents driving past a military camp north of Kidal. The FLA quickly lowered the Malian flag and replaced it with the flag of Azawad. Malian security forces then regrouped at the police station, but by 2 p.m. the position was overwhelmed. That's when the Tuaregs stormed the governor's palace across the street and raised their flag on the building.
We have captured a building, my lord!
This was the administrative headquarters for General El Haj Ag Gamu, a Tuareg who remained loyal to the junta. FLA troops then pushed 500 meters further and reached the roundabout at the center of Kidal. And that's when they celebrated their victory by raising their colors, as they regained authority on this very symbolic town. With of course the mandatory selfie. Meanwhile, Malian forces regrouped south and entrenched inside the military base, which was also the regional headquarters of the Africa Corps. Many of the fleeing troops were fired at by the Tuaregs. Those who couldn't run were captured. In this video, it even seems the FLA was trying to recruit some of the Malian soldiers that surrendered. Or maybe it was some form of re-education, to plant a seed in their mind. Because in this video, we can see over 200 Malian soldiers being released. Each one of them was even given some money so they could buy food. This is smart because by treating prisoners well, they can expect other bases and outposts to just surrender without a fight. Soon enough, the Russian military base south of Kidal was under siege. The Russian garrison made use of all its firepower to break down enemy assaults. The Tuaregs are known for hit-and-run attacks and ambushes. There's no way they could storm this base without suffering massive casualties. At the same time, the Afrika Korps could not expect any reinforcements, since JNIM detachments launched simultaneous attacks all across the country, including in Bamako. All the aircraft and all the government's elite forces were pinned down by JNIM forces operating north of the capital. I'm telling you, this was a perfectly coordinated offensive between two groups, the FLA and the JNIM, that don't even like each other, but they do have a common goal. Anyway, by the 26th of April, the Russian Afrika Korps in Kidal was trapped. That's why they made a deal with the FLA to withdraw and evacuate the base. And by deal, I mean they paid their way out. Now, many pro-Russian analysts said this was fake, that it was only the Malians that were evacuating the base, not the mighty Afrika Korps. But the footage did show dozens of white men in trucks as they departed Kidal. This video was geolocated right here, meaning the Afrika Korps drove north to reach the RN18 road leading westwards. And that's how the FLA escorted the Russian convoy out of town. Afrika Korps sources mentioned the evacuation of 250 Russian personnel, as well as 300 Malian troops. In the following video, we can also observe how the convoy was composed of multiple trucks, but also Tornado G MRLS, MTO UB2 maintenance truck, and a D30 howitzer.
A shameful display!
Imagine the headlines worldwide had this happened to French or American troops operating in the Sahel. Once the Russians departed, the FLA quickly took over the base with a lot of equipment still inside. And the craziest thing is that the Afrika Korps even left behind a full-fledged drone control substation, including relays and a command post. As part of the same deal, Russian mercenaries also abandoned the northern town of Thessalit, where they left everything behind. This was a great victory for the Tuaregs of the Front de Libération de l'Azawad. However, this wasn't the end of problems for the Malian armed forces. The loss of Kidal was just the first domino to fall. Intense fighting also erupted all along the Niger River from Gao to Mopti and Sévaré. Here we have a visual confirmation of this with hundreds of JNIM troops driving across town. But it was also mentioned that they failed to storm the Russian base located nearby. And this is supported by this footage, where we see insurgents being repulsed by very precise 82mm mortar fire. Meanwhile, Russian helicopters also intervened around the clock. But it's really hard to know how effective they really were. There's only limited aircraft available, and there were hundreds of detachments operating at the same time. The next day, on the 27th of April, Russian forces also withdrew from their base in La Beizanga, located on the Mali-Niger border. So we could see how the Afrika Korps was abandoning all its bases and outposts located at the extremity of their perimeter. In Tessit, Malian soldiers agreed to hand over their weapons in exchange for safe passage from the town. Allegedly, there was a similar negotiated withdrawal near Timbuktu in the town of Ber. In the end, on the 29th of April, we can see Malian armored vehicles patrolling through the town of Kati, where JNIM first launched the offensive. According to me, this means the claims of a siege of Bamako by the jihadists are greatly exaggerated. We're not there yet. Nonetheless, the Afrika Korps is obliged to deploy great resources to escort all oil tanker convoys in order to push through JNIM's blockade. The situation is nonetheless catastrophic for Malian security forces, as JNIM forces continue to harass exposed government outposts. So this is the current situation in Mali. We can believe the military junta will fall back and try to reinforce its presence in the western part of the country at the expense of the eastern part. With the fall of Kidal and Thessalit, it's just a matter of time before FLA forces surround the Russian base of Agerhak. Maybe we're gonna see another negotiated withdrawal. And if the Tuaregs take control of Agerhak, then Anefis would be next. And this is essentially the last base in Tuareg territory. Further south is the Russian base in Menaka that could also be abandoned. If that happens, the Niger River would form the new de facto border for the government, with the towns of Gao and Timbuktu at the forefront. However, even these towns could be threatened. With the JNIM Fulani heartland in their back, I really don't know how long the Malian armed forces and the Africa Corps will be able to hold on to these strongholds. And if these towns fall, it's really a domino effect, because then it's Mopti that could fall. And if that happens, the Malian government is going to be at the same exact spot it was in 2012 before the French intervention.
A great success!
Now, of course, the big question is, what is the Africa Corps going to do? Here we can see Africa Corps mercenaries in Minika saying that everything is under control. Same thing for this unit deployed in Burem. But at this point, a counteroffensive seems highly unlikely. But that's something that is still to be determined. That's all I have for you today. See you in the next one.